Hello, and today we will talk about how to add parameters in our routes in Angular. So to start, um, first of all, in our routes or app routing module, we have to specify here a additional router that we need for our path or for our URL. So for example, let's create a new path for the region. Then in here, we're just gonna paste that, then save, and then afterwards, what we're going to do is we will add a variable for it. So basically what we're going to use in here is the name of the country. This is basically meaning that our path is going to be a region in a specific country. So we basically finished setting up for our app-routing module. We're now going to jump in our region country.ts. So inside our region country.ts, we first need to add some variables that we're going to use in order that we can display um, our URL in a very specific way. So first of all, what we're going to do is here in our ng on init, we will add a code in here that, for example, it's going to be this dot region name. So this is basically a variable that we must use in order to get a parameter for our Angular system. So here I'm gonna declare a new variable called region name with a type of any, and then we will save it. So this dot region name is equivalent to this dot activated route. But first, we also need to inject the activated router. So as you can see, I already imported the activated router in here that will allow us to access some methods here in Angular for the parameter routing. So we need to inject that. So what we're going to do is create a variable inside the constructor or inject it, private activated route with a type of activated router, then save it. So this that activated route, that snapshot, then parameter map that get name. So basically what this means is in our region name, it's going to get the added URL. Like for example, if you can see in the URL, it's gonna basically get the added name in here. For example, like that. This variable region name will store this added name variable in our URL. Then after that, we also need to create a variable called region with a type of any. And then under this, it's gonna be this dot region is equivalent to this dot my data too. Basically, we will use the array in here. Basically, the variable array that we created that stored the JSON data. We're going to use this and find and use the method find x dot name is equivalent to this dot region name. So basically, this variable or the region variable will hold or will find the um, the name or the variable that we basically picked up in our URL and search it inside our my data to array, and if it matches, it will display the data that we need. Then I'll save it. Okay, and then going to our HTML file, what we're going to do in here is we're gonna create a div in here. So instead of using this ng4 for the table row, we just need to remove this, and I can comment that out for now, and then I can make it like div that card, And then I'll add a bootstrap padding for the margin for the y-axis. And then I'm just gonna create a div with a class of card content. Save that. And then what I'm going to do in here is I'm gonna add a p tag, and then I'll just display the area. So what we're going to do is we're gonna access the area from the region variable in our TypeScript file. Then dot area. Okay. So as you can see, it's still not displaying anything because we use the name variable wherein it's not found in our API. So what we're going to do, for example, is we're gonna type in Afghanistan, and then the area will display. For example, let's use a different country. Let's say Switzerland. The area will also display for the Switzerland, and then for a much presentable way, we can also change the display in our web. So for example, in the country region, let's just make this country, and then let's interpolate the region name, basically the name of the country. So it's showing here, country is Switzerland. It's basically the same as for our URL in here for the parameter. And then what we're going to do is also in the countries, instead of making this countries, let's make it the region that we're looking at. So region dot region. Okay, so now you can see that the region is displaying. It depends on our URL. The country is also displaying, and it's dependent to our URL, and the area of the region or the country is also dependent to our URL. For example, given that we still did not edit this components, so it's still gonna display as the usual one. And for example, we will use the parameter Angola. So let's say region country. It's not displaying anything anymore because we didn't set a parameter and the path requires parameters. And then if we put Angola there, it's gonna basically display the data for the Angola country. And then um, going to our sidebar, that component.ts, we basically have a string in here which is called Afghanistan. And then to set a default value for this region country button, like for example, if I click this region country button, it won't show me any details because there's no value as it is for now in um our region. Basically, it's not getting anything. It's like having a slash with a null in here for the URL. So what we're going to do in that is in our sidebar .component.ts, I created a string variable of country with a default value of Afghanistan, and in our sidebar .component.html, we're gonna add a let's see, let's just remove this for now because okay, it's still not necessary in that way. Okay, and now I'm gonna bind that string variable. For example, I'm gonna bind it to the router link, and then in here, let's just copy this, then paste it inside, and then we're going to add a parameter in it. So it should be like this. Okay, and then we're gonna add a parameter. It should be country. Experiencing some error. So maybe I need to remove this first and then put this column or colon or apostrophe inside that and put a bracket in there. It's not working. Let's try to check it. Maybe I did something wrong or I had a mistype, but it should be binded to a property to the router link. This path should be binded to the router link. And inside here, we're just going to add the variable that we created, which should be the country. And then when we click this, it's basically giving us to the default value of Afghanistan. So again, I went to the name display, and then if I click region country, it's gonna give us the Afghanistan value. Okay, and then next is what we're going to do now is we basically tackled the parameters on how to use the parameters here in Angular. What we're going to do now is we will use the parameter query wherein um, it's also a unexpected URL that's gonna be created depending to the scenario that you're going to make. So let's go back to our region dash country dot component dot html. So in here, under the container, so under the container here, we're gonna create um excuse me, a a button. And then let's say we just put it down. Let's try to fix that spelling. Here in the button with a class of button dash light with a margin at the bottom of 3. And then it will have a click function of let's say after clicking this button, it's gonna change the country that we have. Okay, and we save that. It's still not it's still experiencing some errors because we didn't declare this method for now. And then and then um what we're going to do is we will create the method for the change country in here. So under the ng on it, we're going to create a change country method, change country, save it. This dot region name is equal to this dot user input. But we still don't have the user input variable in here. So we're going to create a user input variable in here with a type of any. And we will save this. And going back to our region dash country dot component dot html, we're gonna create a input in here. So above the button, let's say input, and then it will have a class of text, and it's also gonna use the two-way binding using the ng model. Then it's going to be equals to our user input, and then it will have um a label of type here. Okay, so now basically there it is. We're just gonna try to wrap this inside a div tag. So I'll copy this again and then create a div and then paste it. Okay, and we're going to create a p tag after the input for us to see if the ng model or the two-way binding is working while we're typing. So we're just gonna interpolate the user input that we created for the variable. Okay, and let's see if it works. Okay, it's basically working, but in here the display button is not fully functional because we still didn't update or change something in our code. So going back to our region dash country that component dot ts, um, we will remove this console.log, and then in our change country, we will add a this dot region, this dot my data that find x dot name, this dot region name. Okay, then after that, this is basically the same code in line 25, yet we're getting um the user input value already. So basically it's not it's basically much user friendlier, unlike typing in the URL. So for the demo, let's try Angola, and then let's click display. It's basically showing us the value for Angola now. And basically it's still parameters, wherein after this I'm gonna add the query parameters. So going back to our region dash country dot component dot html, we're gonna add a button in here again. Basically this button will ask the user if he wants to search countries or not. Basically in here it's gonna be button class with a button dash light with margin at the bottom of 3, and then in here we're just gonna basically add a label for it, search. Okay, and then add a click function or click event, which is going to be search. Then as you can see, search still has an error, so let's create a search method. So going to our typescript.ts, search method is just going to be this dot search button is equivalent to true. Okay, and we still don't have the search button variable, so we're just gonna create search button with a type of boolean with a initial value of false. Okay, and then after that we're gonna go back to our HTML file, and in our search button, after creating this method, we're gonna add a router link to it. Router link is equivalent to region comma region dot name. Then we will save it, and then after that we're also gonna add a query parameters. Query parameters is equivalent to search. We have to put brackets on it. Search result, and then we will create a directive called ngf. ngf is not search result. Okay, but we still don't have this variable, and then we're gonna create a variable again, search result, with a type of any. Then we will save it, and then after that, okay, after that we're gonna add a div in here to hold or to contain these inputs and the buttons, so that if ever the user didn't click the search button, it won't show anything. So let's just cut that and create a div, then save it, and then let me just format this document and to make it more presentable. Then inside our div, we're gonna create a ngf again is equivalent to search button. Basically, if the search button is true, it's gonna display all of this user input in here. So if I click search, it's gonna basically show me the type in here, but the query parameters it's still not basically showing. So Let's just save this HTML file and then go to our TypeScript file and this. And then in our TypeScript file, in our search method, we're gonna add a this dot search result equivalent to this dot search button. And then we'll create a this dot router. Basically, router it's just this is just another way on how to navigate to your desired URL by using the router module. So private router routes. You have to inject this. Uh, let's say let's make this route. Maybe I'm having some conflicts in here. Private route. Let's just use the route. Okay. Private routes. I'm experiencing some errors and maybe I can save that. Okay, let's do it again. Let's try to add it in here. Private route router. Okay, now it's working. And then route dot navigate navigate, excuse me. Let's create a URL or a path after we click the search button. It's gonna be region, then this dot region dot name, and then comma. And then we're going to add our query parameters in here, which is going to be edit this dot search button. It's basically gonna tell the URL that we are in the search mode or in the edit mode. So if I click search, it's now showing me the edit is equals to true. Basically, the value of our search result in here, okay, it is initially false, and then after we click the search button earlier, it's gonna display the necessary inputs and the buttons that we need for searching a country or a region in our code in our HTML file. So for recap, basically, um, using parameters, you can play around a lot with your routing here in Angular. You can basically display some products or basically specific products that you want, like what we did in here. Basically, what I did um, after passing or using the two-way binding in Angular here in our change country method, we created a variable region name and stored the user input in it and created a logic that this user input is going to be used in order to find the specific name in our regions array wherein we stored our my data or our variable my data too, wherein that array is going to be used in finding the country that the user wants to display. And then after that, basically it will return or it will give us the value of the region wherein we can use the variable region in our HTML document in displaying the name, the area, and the the region of the specific or the exact country or exact words that the user typed in the user input text box. That's it for the parameters. And for the query parameters, as we go back to our TypeScript, so as for our query parameters, it is basically a additional path that is assigned to the button in here in our search button to let to tell the user that he is or she is editing or he wanted to search some countries and display its values. Basically you can play around with query parameters, like for example, instead of displaying edit this dot search button or the value of the search button, you can display the price of the product. You can basically say that price and then make it this dot product dot product price, and make this dependent also to the user input in your Angular project. Or maybe you can use this query parameters for filtering. But basically in this example, it's just like the basic. So I just basically use the query parameters in order to display that the users ticked or click the search button. Okay, then we'll save that. And lastly, for our last example, we're going to create a route guard, or or in Angular, it's basically the first line of protection in order that the user can't hard code the URL. Like for example, I'm trying to put Angola in here. Then, okay, I stopped the server, so let me run it again for a better example. So basically, route guard will stop the user or the person who like is really good in computer or maybe using the web for hard coding some data in here and access the datas without any permissions. So for example, I'm gonna type in Switzerland or maybe Slovakia. Okay, that's basically hard coding in your URL. So in a actual development, you don't want that. So I'm gonna show you how to stop the user from doing that. So let's generate a auth guard, or use the command ng generate guard, and I'll name it auth. Okay, I'm just gonna use basically the can activate method, which is the one that I'm used to. And then in our auth, you can just basically keep this that way to make this example simple. And we'll go to our app-routing.module. And in here, we're gonna basically add a can activate and put this in the class of auth guard. Basically, the guard that you created, which is found in here, as you can see in here, auth.guard. This is the can activate. This can activate basically tells us, or tells the Angular that it's only gonna be allowed. It's only gonna give to the user some ex, uh, exposure, or it's gonna give the user an permission to access the data if the user complies all the conditions inside your method can activate. Basically, can activate method in here is the one can that will be typed in here. But for now, let's just use a basic example. So let's say this method will just return false, and we will save it, and then we'll run our server, and then we're just gonna refresh this. Okay, name, area, region. It's still basically giving us the Afghanistan, so maybe I'll try to add or check Slovakia. It's still basically working. Wait, I think I missed something. So maybe in here, in our routing module. Oh yeah, I mistyped the can activate. Instead of putting this in the null path, we can put this in here in our example in the path that we used. So as you can see, if I'm gonna access the region or hard code it, okay, it won't show me anything in this path because the code in the TypeScript document is basically highly dependent already in this path. So basically, I can comment this out for to avoid confusion, and then let's try doing the region slash Afghanistan. Okay, now basically the Angular is protecting the system for unnecessary exposure for the user, because in our auth guard, it's going to return a value of false, wherein in our app-routing.module, it stops this path to be exposed to the user. But if we change this into true, then save it, it's basically gonna show us that we can now access um, the components in our Angular, and the user is now allowed to access anything in the components. So let's try region or hard coded slash Afghanistan. Afghanistan. It's basically showing me Afghanistan. Let's try doing Slovakia in here. Slovakia. And then display. Okay, it's basically working as it is. That's just basically the purpose of OutGuard or route guard here in Angular, is to prevent some user or individuals to hard code and to access some important data in your system. Thank you for listening for this course, and see you in the next course.